Hello there, folks. Welcome today to the Q Software webinar on user access reviews, user certification, periodic review, different phrases, different descriptions, but that's the area we're going to cover today. We're going to take about 35 minutes of your time today, and please feel free to ask us any questions. You will know the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So let's get some questions in there. I'll key them into the chat box or the question box, and we'll try and pick those up as we're going along. So what are we talking about today? Well, I think the core issue is that for most people today, the user access review certification, whatever you want to call it, is amongst the most difficult, time-consuming and unpleasant tasks. So I find many people, particularly on the IT side of the equation, probably look forward to at least of anything they do connected to security of the ERP system. But there are good reasons why you need to do it. One is that, particularly if you're a publicly traded company, but and therefore have to have compliance legislation like SOX, that you will need to do this process. But I think we're now finding that all mid-market companies, certainly in North America and certain other territories, are being forced by their auditors to go through this process. But there is, I think, something that's often missed in it, and that is that it's not just about satisfying your auditors. It is the best way in which you can ensure that access to your system, your J.D. Edwards ERP system, is correct. And I think the point that is particularly missed is that it's your best way of getting the user management to buy into understanding the access, and therefore owning the access and owning the issues with the access if there are any. But the overall issue and objective we're going to take you through today is how we can help you create a much less time-consuming process by automating and using workflow a lot more to break down the process and turn it into something that really you can switch on in an hour, a couple of hours maybe, and then pick up the results later on. So my friend Preston is going to show you that a little bit later on. I think that you really don't need to know any more about me, but Preston, why don't you just give a 30-second outline to yourself?
Thanks, Mike, as usual. So I've been in the J.D. Edwards sphere as an application implementation consultant for the last 20 years. About 5-6 years ago, I started working with Q Software products, and in the last couple of years have come on as a technical manager to liaison with the business and discuss architecture of the products to help solve problems as you roll the product out and implement within your company. So nice to meet everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Preston. And Preston will be showing you the automation a little bit later on. One thing I did want to mention before we get into the meat of the process, the user certification process, is that Q Software last October was merged in with a larger organization known as Apsian Security. I can't give you any further details today, but there have now been another 4 companies join the group since then. There will be an announcement of this merged organization in about 4 weeks' time. But the key issue to us in our Q Software J.D. Edwards world is that none of these companies have J.D. Edwards functionality, and that's why they wanted us to join. So our position, our products, etc., are safe and secure. But perhaps more importantly, what I was on a call this morning discussing the planning and how we bring some of the Apsian functionality into the Q Software world. We will be announcing certainly over the next few months cross-platform SOD support, being able to manage your SOD issues across multiple platforms, similar user provisioning across multiple platforms. Most of our customers now don't just have one system. With the larger companies that are involved in mergers, you'll have multiple ERP systems. But even for a mid-market company who is focused on JD Edwards as your ERP, you have data in other islands like Salesforce, etc. And being able to manage users and identity and SOD across those platforms will be an important issue. But we'll be talking more about that later on in the year. But just wanted to bring that one out because people ask me about it. Then let's get into the meat of it. And what I'm going to go through very rapidly before we get into the demonstration is perhaps to use an old English phrase, teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. It's a very, very strange phrase, but what it actually means is I'm going to tell you, whether you want to know or not, what an access review is, how the auditor looks at it, the considerations they take into account, because I suspect most of you are from the IT side here, and then briefly touching on the review cycle before we get into the demonstration. So let's get into the meat of it, and please, if you've got any questions, don't understand me, or somebody said on the webinar last month, Mike, you talk too fast. I don't understand what you're saying. So if I'm talking too fast, please just get it in, and I'll try and slow down a bit. But there you go. So access reviews. All right, let's just bring it down to that phrase. Let's make it simple. All right, let's call it an access review. All right. And coming at this briefly from an auditor's perspective, what is an access review about? Well, you'll hopefully be aware that external audits are about looking at your controls. All right? And if you have an internal auditor working in your organization, their job is to look at the controls. And access reviews are a very important part of it, and probably one of the most time-consuming. But bear in mind in IT general controls, I think there are 20 odd different controls potentially that are involved. But this is the one that I find we can help people with in terms of time saving and effort, etc. But overall, from the auditor's viewpoint, what the access review is about, it is about ensuring that the users have appropriate access, i.e. that the access they have, particularly to financial systems, is the right one for their job. All right? Some people look at this as a fraud issue. It's more general than that. It's making sure that people don't have inappropriate access. All right? And the way that an auditor looks at this is they want you to be able to review and approve access. It's about getting the managers within the business to approve the access that is there. So if it's the financial controller, perhaps they've got purchasing clerks working in their section. They need to look and see and understand and make sure they're happy with the access that those employees have. Unfortunately, when this is done manually, what a lot of this ends up being done is that somebody prints out a large PDF, and the worst I've seen had 200 pages of it, and then it's plunked down, on the desk of the financial controller who's asked to check it. And I can tell you exactly what that financial controller does in that instance. He just initials it and he doesn't check it at all. And that is very dangerous because he or she, that financial controller, is taking responsibility legally then for that access. And if somebody commits fraud through that, it's his job at stake. So we owe it to as IT to provide that manager, that financial controller, with the right information in a manner that they understand. But overall, the key is that, this is the reason that drives most of this, is the auditors will always focus on this issue. Access reviews are something they will always, almost always on an annual review, want to look at the data. So most people, all of you on this call, I suspect, are doing this manually. All right? And let's just look at it from an auditor's perspective and what the issues are with a manual review. And the biggest problem, going back to that financial controller, all right, if in his section, he's got several roles with 10 permissions, blah blah blah, or 10 combinations of access, he could be looking at around about 1,000 items that he's reviewing, trying to understand, and it can become very complicated, particularly if it's likely that employees in his remit have multiple roles, and what multiple roles means to the access. All right? So the manual process is really about extract, and I think anybody can do that. Even without the tools, you can run SQL and take that out. You might not actually get the right answer in some areas, particularly in terms of multiple roles, but you can get pretty close to it. But then you're going to give that as a PDF or by paper or electronically, and they need to look at it. All right, but the core issue, as you'll be aware, is that it's extremely difficult for that financial controller to understand that data. All right, it's difficult to put consistency into it, in that the financial controller really does have to understand and approve it. So we've got to give them information that is talking their language in a way that they will understand it. And most of us in the manual review just won't do that. All right? It's a matter of trying to get to the end of a difficult process. And so really the final issue is that the review actually isn't performed. All right? It's just ticked off and not performed properly. All right? So the auditor comes in, and their perspective is, of course, that they want to make sure that you meet the Sarbanes-Oxley or any of the other standards. But they also want to have a look at some of the other controls, i.e. who has been terminated and has their access removed. And they will be asking you to provide evidence, random evidence of those things. They're likely to say, right, give me a list of all the employees that were terminated in this 2-week period, all right, and prove that you've removed the access. And the same with access that's granted. And they'll be looking for role separation between the issues like production and dev. And most particularly, and I do find that more and more auditors are asking this one, because I think it's a really critical issue. And it's one, I think, in the J.D. Edwards community the auditors didn't ask about historically, and that is elevated privileges. Those users who have access to some kind of systems role, who in the end have access to vast amounts of the system, all right, and how are you going to prove to the auditor that those people should have it? And secondly, how are you going to prove what they did when they were doing it? All right, so if they're not asking you those questions today, all right, they're going to, all right. And then the age-old one, do you have people sharing accounts, and why have you got people sharing accounts, and should you? No, you shouldn't. So the overall issue for auditors is about unauthorized access, all right, and if you're following a least privilege, i.e. giving security access to users only if it's required for them to do their job, you'll be okay. But if you're not, yes, what they're looking for is a number of different things that could happen. All right? Financial loss. All right? Bearing in mind that the figures show that you have a 1 in 2 chance, all right, of somebody committing fraud on your internal systems, all right, over the next 2-year period. That's how likely some kind of internal access problems are likely to occur in your environment. So you need to be able to look at those things and answer the questions. So what is the audit procedure? They will, at the beginning of the audit, decide what the sample size is and what they're going to ask you for. They're going to ask you for a list of the documentation, the policy and the procedures. And then they're going to take your periodic reviews and check the output. All right? They're going to take that PDF, which the financial controller has initialed, and say, right, okay, we'll prove that he has actually done this properly. All right? Does he understand it? Now, they might or might not ask that to the financial controller. I sit in front of him and say, here you go, you've initialed this. Did you read it? Do you understand this access? I think the good news for many JD Edwards customers is that a lot of the audit community do not understand the complexities of JD Edwards security and therefore don't get into the details. But they are learning and they are moving forward in that area, and they will begin. If they haven't started asking you for this documentation, they're going to be asking for it in years to come. So, in a sense, what I'm telling you is your process for the user certification is going to get more complicated, more difficult. All right. I won't go through all of this in great detail, but there's a checklist for you. If you'd like a copy of these slides, by the way, just send me an email afterwards or reply to the reminder that you got an hour ago. We'll make sure you get a copy of the slides. But the issue is that you've got to be ready for the auditor to be asking these questions. They want to see the documentation for the policies, all right? And they want to make sure that the policies have been approved, all right? And the policies are correct, and that all the reviews and the audit trail are all stored, etc., etc. I suspect most of you are skirting around a lot of this at the moment, because your auditor has perhaps not got into that detail. But I repeat, they are going to get into that detail. This is going to happen to you. So what is a very time-consuming and difficult process, the user certification, is going to get more difficult. All right. Just finally, then, if you're not aware, this is the normal review cycle. All right. Preston's going to show you this in a bit more detail. All right. It's about creating a review, sending to the owners. The owners approve, deny access. Changes are applied. All right. And then you confirm and then repeat. All right. Read and send, repeat. And the issue, of course, is how long is this going to take you? Some of you will be there in a situation where you're being asked to do this quarterly. And you've got to be very careful that you're not trying to finish off one review manually before you kick the next one off. All right? And what Preston's going to show you is how you can actually set it up in an hour or two and finish it all in a week. So that's the objective of it. But Preston, why they've probably listened to my, I've had no complaints today yet, so I don't know if it's because nobody's listening or whether I'm talking a little bit more clearly today, but my wife always says I mutter. There you go. That's only because I don't want her to hear what I'm saying, I suppose. Right, Preston.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that very much. As Mike mentioned, what we're going to talk about today is the periodic review piece of our life cycle of opportunities and applications within JD Edwards. The periodic review itself is designed to handle a couple of different aspects of what you need to do every year to kind of maintain your compliance. One is to look at the users and what they're assigned to, and two is to look at the roles and what they have access to. So I'll go through both of those sort of briefly here to kind of give you the overview of what's done here. And if you have any questions, you can certainly ask Mike to send you some details, or you can send us a note at qsoftware.com. So the security workbench piece is where we'll start, I think. The idea here being that we are looking at the actual security workbench, what we all know is the 950, and we're looking at specifically the types of data that access is granted to on a user level. Generally speaking, we like to talk about that at roles. We certainly do see people use the user side of it, but that makes it very difficult. 4 general ideas working with the product. The idea that you create a review that creates a snapshot of the 950 that you can then work with and look at. And then working with that review, this is the grid. This is the area where your users would come in to do their approvals. It's how they'll look at the data, manage to look at what's going on in the system. And a couple things to notice here in the overview. Number one, the dashboard itself, you get a unique ID that helps audit track what you've done so that you can see that it hasn't changed over time. You can actually look at 950 records. You can look at records that have changed. You can look at the F950W records, which is the records that deal with sort of the new stuff, things like orchestrator and user-defined security as well. You can look at profile types, right? The star public settings, roles, and users. You can look at things that have been added, changed, deleted, or unchanged within the system. And you can look at statuses, whether you've seen how much has been approved, if anyone's been rejected, or those that have been bypassed by the group, maybe at the ignored status. The idea behind all of this is that it's a workbench so that your data is filtered by users. We have setups in the configuration side that identify whether you'd like to set up groups of roles to be reviewed by a particular person, or do you want those people to review specific people, individuals, regardless of what role they're in? And then that's the same for the security workbench side. The roles and the users that have security records, we have people who are assigned to approve those, who are responsible for looking at the applications and the accesses that have been granted and making the determination that it's relevant. Within the grid itself, what you can see here is a group of users that are in the system. If you'd like, we can filter just by the role piece. That'll get rid of any of the actual stray users pieces. And then we can look at roles that have been added, roles that have been deleted, roles that have been changed over time. And if we look at the roles that have been changed, for as an example, when we review that record, what it does for us is it gives us an opportunity to see what actually has changed. That's that efficiency that Mike's talking about. That's the thing that goes out there and lets us only look for records that have changed and gives you feelings for what has changed in the system, and very clearly denotes that these records changed since the last time we ran it. So one of the foundations of doing periodic review is that first one might take time, but we're establishing a baseline so that as you go through it, things that have been pre-approved and nothing's changed, you can sort of cursorily look at that data, review it, say, yep, I'm good with it, and approve it in a lot shorter period of time. And then you can focus on things like this, where the changes have happened. You can say, yep, that's right, I didn't want that to be deleted, that's fine. And you can continue with your approval process. That sort of notification using the color scheme is there to specifically drive changes to the system. And anytime that we use the systems to be designed in our audit review process, the adds are green, the deletes are red, the changes are purple. It's very clear so that you know what's going on. Once you sort of get that baseline established, you can run it over and over again, look at the data, and make a very quick determinations about it. Once you review the data and you get to that sort of conversation where you feel comfortable with how the data is working and what's been changed inside of the data, it makes it very quick to be able to handle to people, the approvers, to say, these things have all changed. I've removed these out of the system. I've deleted these records, and it makes it very clear and very easy for the users of the system, people who are not necessarily on the technical side, to identify the things that they're concerned about in the system. Once again, you can change and look at the statuses that have been approved, not reviewed, and have been ignored in that process or rejected, and you can choose to approve it, and you can actually make comments no matter what status you're changing it to. You can leave a comment here for the people that work on the technical side to do the work, and that'll actually push down into the documentation again so that you have that audit trail you're looking for. So on the security side, this is what we're really trying to get to, is to look at the security detail and say that if you're given a role and you've been granted access to applications, that someone has seen that and approved that particular role to do those functions. Lots of times we use names like GL Inquiry 1 to talk about people who can look into and inquire into the GL. It's important to know what that means, and that is where you assign a role approver and someone who's responsible to make the decision that those applications are correct. On the user profile side, it's the other side. It's the idea that we're putting people into those roles. Same idea, right? We have a snapshot ID. We have grids here to help filter the data, and we can look for very quickly the things that have changed in the same concept. We use the same sequencing of the data. We use the actual information out there so that you can see what's changed, how the data has changed. And we also look at the different accesses in the system. As you can see here, we've removed these roles from that group and we've added the two new ones. So the reds are out, the greens are in, and that previous snapshot comes from a snapshot that we did at a baseline level to sort of establish our norm. And every time you run that baseline, it will reset these values so that you have changes as of that date and time. But if you run that baseline once and you work with your audit team, you can actually use that net change every time, unless there's a period of time or a drastic change in your system. You've got the quick, efficient way to get the data that you need to get reviewed very quickly. This data obviously goes through the user profile. This is
important if people start changing things like the address book numbers, if there's a redesign, the changes that go along with those particular aspects of your system. And then also, if sometimes clients will come in and put new threads in, right? They'll have that new user in the system. JDE is sort of the default one that we all know and love, but sometimes people will put in something for AP and something for AR, something for finance or manufacturing. If those things change, then they're delineated here. So that sort of encompasses the actual usage for the user's side of things. Same idea that you can filter by what's been approved, rejected, or ignored. All of this data is encapsulated together. It's written into our custom tables for audit purposes. All of the reports can be accessed through the system. And to that end as well, after you've worked with both sets of data and have closed them, you can actually come back to the snapshots within the system and look at previous data. You can go back to previous installs, look at those data, look at the changes that happened, look at the overall details, review anything that happened in that inquiry, and give this access to the groups of people that audit your system and want to make sure data is working. And then all of that data obviously comes out in exportable in Excel very quickly to get quick reports out of the system, but it's all there in the data side. If you've got other reporting tools, there's the custom tables you can access with standard reporting tools and print your own reports if you need to. We have our standard report that actually details all the things that were approved, which ones did make through the approval pieces and were left open. Another thing is based on the last review, you can actually run the next audit based on those who didn't answer this audit. So you can filter out the people that got it done in time. And if the next group needs to run semi-annually, maybe to get that done, to catch up for what they didn't get done this time, you can certainly do that and use that filtering criteria from the last audit going forward into the next audit. So overall, the idea behind this is that we establish that baseline, a little bit of work to get that first one done just because of the level of detail that we're trying to get through. But once you get on from that, you're dealing with efficiencies that go with how quickly you can identify changes, deletions, additions to the system. You can make those changes and you can assign both people to approve the roles in the system as well as people to then approve the users that go into those roles so that there's a nice, neat, tidy package for you to provide your audit team at the end of the year. That's all for me. Thanks, Mike. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Preston. Any questions, guys, girls, men, women? Please key them in now, and we'll pick those up before we finish. So coming towards the end anyway, but I just wanted to cover a couple of issues. The user access review is linked to other issues, other general controls, and this is something you got to be aware of as you automate this. What is next down the line? All right? And it's totally linked, as you hopefully understood from the demonstration, to your user provisioning policy, because the auditor is going to ask the questions, as I said earlier, and they're going to ask what your policy is, and your process for user certification is going to show what actually happened. This user ended up with this access, and they will go back to the policy, right? How did that user get this access, etc. So you've got to think about that as a connected issue. And I also referred earlier on to the security model. If you're getting a lot of response back from the users during the certification process to say, we've got a problem here, all right, I'm the role owner, but we've got too much access here, and that's fine if there's a small number of those. But if you've got a lot of people coming back to you, all right, you got to be ready for it. And what that shows is that your security model has role definition problems, and we need to then help you to understand that and find a way out of it. So two things to bear in mind. What I'm saying is that it's not a freestanding process, this user review. So what are the problems we're talking about? Three in summary. I'll refer to them at the beginning. The manual process is very labor intensive, and secondly, that giving managers reports with no visibility of what it actually means is very, very dangerous. I know you want to get it done and get it out of the way, but professionally, that's not correct. and it will go wrong at some point in the future, either because of fraud or because the auditor points it out. All right, and but above all else, you've got to be able to provide evidence to the auditors, all right, that you've done it properly and this is what has happened. So hopefully what we've shown you is a process that has huge time savings through automation. So you can produce and distribute the access reports within minutes. And as Preston said, the huge saving comes after the first one because you only need to work on net change. All right. What are the changes since the last audit? Clear and sensible information for business users. All right. It's about giving them information that they will understand so that they can logically say, yes, this is correct, this is wrong, not just initially. All right. And then a feedback channel whereby they can actually give you that feedback to say this is right or wrong. And then the final issue, of course, is to be able to give an audit trail, a set of documentation to the auditors, all right, and manage it all within the workflow, as Preston just showed you. Have we got any questions? First question here, Preston, what versions of JD Edwards do we support with this automated process?
Everything after 9. The previous versions are out of touch, if you will, but I think it's 9.1, 9.2, and I think we actually have it in 8.11 as well.
Okay, second question for you. Just in summary, I think you actually did touch on this, but in summary, how long does it take to set up a review the first time around? What's your opinion? Perhaps mid-sized system, 200-300 users, 50 roles. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, we just did that recently with the client. What we did is part of the purchase in the onboarding training process was training was done as the configuration was done. So went through and did the supervisor assignments, decided how we wanted to supervise that and so forth. It was a half a day of training on the front end, homework, if you will, and then back at the end of the week to finish up and tie up the support and design piece. So I believe it's the net of a couple of days of service work with us, and by the end of the week that you're set in running.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. Another one here is about pricing. I'll take that one.
Yep.
The module starting price is $5,000 US per annum, depending on the number of users on your system. I will say in passing that if you can't justify this through one cycle, 1 year, I'd be very, very surprised, all right, because it will cost you more than that to do it manually. Any other questions? I can't see anything at the moment. Look, if you've got any other questions, just mail us back. You can reply to the reminder you got an hour and a half ago. That will get to Preston and I. If you'd like a copy of the slides, just let me know in that email, and you will get a link tomorrow to the recording. I think that's about all we've got time for today. I said we'd take 35 minutes, and strange enough, we take 35 minutes, which is accuracy that isn't normal for you and I, Preston. But
that's true. We're getting better. We're getting better.
Yeah, I don't know. Thanks for your time today, folks. Well, hopefully we've shown you how you can save yourself an awful lot of heartache by automating your certification, your user access reviews. But let me know if we can help any further. I'd be delighted to hear from you. All the best.